And today we're going to talk about when buying makes more sense than renting. So on Tuesday I talked about when renting makes more sense than buying, so this is the other side of the coin. Now, there are benefits to home ownership that you don't have with renting. So there's no way you can do a video of when buying makes sense without covering some of those benefits. But let's start with the key indicator that you should be buying instead of renting. You're ready to make a commitment. Yes, when you're buying a home, you are making a commitment. Here's why. So with renting, if you decide that you want to move in a year, most leases are a year. They're pretty easy to get out of, no drama, okay? When you own a house, if you buy it and a year later you want to sell it, odds are you're going to lose some money. And it's because the transactional cost of buying and selling a house in America, it's expensive. It's anywhere from 4 to 8%, depending on real estate fees, title fees. You know, if you use one of those big mega corporations that say they save you money because they don't use real estate agents, some of their fees are 10%. It can be expensive to sell your house. So even if your house is worth what you bought it for a year ago, even if your house has gone up 3, 4, 5%, you're not going to have enough equity within that short period of time in order to not lose money. So when you're thinking about buying a house, you need to think about making a commitment. When I'm talking to people and they're saying, well, I'm not really sure if I want to live in this town, but I'll just buy, I'll try it for a year. I'm always like, no, you should rent then. You should rent, because otherwise there is a very good chance you will lose money should you decide to sell in a very short period of time. Generally, I'm going to say you need to be there at least 2 to 3 years. Now, you could luck out, right? You could buy a house and get a great deal on it. Interest rates could go down next year and property values could go up and you could make some good money in a short term. But that's not the norm. And that's the thing. When you're thinking about housing, I think it's important to look at history. You know, not a 5-year window, a 30-year window, a 40-year window. What are the trends over an extended period of time? And that's how you can adequately gauge what level of risk you're taking. So if you're ready to make a commitment, buying makes more sense than renting. Now, let's talk about some of the benefits of homeownership as well as some of the arguments against it, because I want to make sure that I'm giving you guys the information that you need to make an educated decision. So when I think about owning a home, I always think about when I'm 70. That's what I'm planning for. And everyone's going to have something different. But I do think that one thing that people don't talk about enough is retirement and old age in America. I don't know how many people at 20, 25, and 30 are wondering what their housing costs are going to be when they're 70, 80, and 90. And that's something that's very important, because living for today can really hurt you tomorrow. The nice thing about owning a house, let's say you buy in 2023 and we do a 30-year fixed mortgage. I always recommend a 30-year fixed. I'll do a video on why, but I always like a 30-year fixed mortgage. Okay, let's say you're 30 years old. You're 30 years old, you buy a house this year, you don't move, okay? You do not treat your house like a piggy bank, and what I mean by that is you don't do cash out refinances. I am not a fan of cash out refinances unless you really need the money for something serious. If you just want to take out money to take out money, I'm generally pretty against that unless you already have a house paid off, because remember, the first thing you should be thinking about is what's my housing cost going to be when I'm 70, 80, or 90. So if you buy a house, you do a 30-year fixed, you make the payments every single month, guess what? In 30 years, you own the house free and clear. And with the 30-year mortgage, you could always accelerate it. Maybe you're going to pay more every month. Maybe you're going to end up owning it in 15 or 20 years. You have that flexibility. But the key is that you're going to own the house free and clear. Now, you're still going to have property taxes and insurance. And when I've done videos about this in the past, people have said, well, property taxes and insurance go up too. Because generally I'm saying, look, rent's going to keep on going up. Rent may be cheaper than a mortgage right now, but 30 years from now, that rent is going to be a lot higher than that mortgage payment on a 30-year fixed. Here's the deal. Yes, property taxes and insurance will increase. The amount that the property taxes increase will depend on where you buy. There's certain parts of the country where if you live in the house, there's caps on how much it can go up yearly. There's other parts of the country where the caps are not very favorable to you. So you definitely want to make sure you're paying attention to that. So property taxes and insurance will go up. That is true. Rent will go up. That is true. And sometimes people will say, well, renting's better because the taxes and insurance are going to go up. Guys, if the taxes and insurance go up, do you think your landlord's going to keep your price the same? Why would they? Their taxes and insurance are going up too. So they're going to be increasing the rent to cover the taxes, to cover the insurance, to cover a mortgage if they have it. And look, they could be treating that house like a piggy bank, right? And every time that house gets equity, they could be taking out equity to buy another investment property. So you're going to be paying your landlord's mortgage, their increase in property taxes, their increase in insurance, whereas had you done a nice 30-year fix, pay it off, in your retirement, you're paying your taxes and your insurance. Okay, so when I think about home ownership, my big thing, and this is personal, is I'm thinking about where am I going to be when I'm 70? How am I going to have the lowest cost of living so I have the highest chance of success? That is a benefit of home ownership. Okay, a lot of times people are talking about equity and how you can gain equity, and owning a home is a way that a lot of Americans have built wealth. If you look at, just think about the Bay Area. Oh my goodness. If you bought a house there in 1992, it was a couple $100,000 and a bag of chips. Now it's $1 million, $1.5 million, $2 million, $3 million. All those people did to make that much money is buy 20, 30 years ago. That's all they did. They didn't have some brilliant business plan. They didn't work really hard every year. They just bought a long time ago. That's it. And the equity piece, can be interesting. Let's take the Bay Area, for example. If they sold and then they buy something that's less expensive and they have money from the sale that they can also put in their bank to help with their retirement. Great. But I don't always focus on the equity portion because you may not want to sell your home. This may be where you want to be forever. So I like to think of it more instead of how much money could I make, which is definitely something to consider, but how low can I get my cost when I retire? How low can I get it? And that's something that you actually get to actively consider and plan when you own a home, because when you rent, you have no control. Right? You don't know what your cost is going to be when you're 70, and in fairness, property taxes and insurance will go up, but that's going to go up much more dramatically. So it's important to recognize when you're buying a home that you're also starting to think about your long-term planning. And that's why I talk about it as a commitment. Now, am I saying that you have to live in the same house for 30 years? I'm not. People will start off with a starter home, then often they'll sell it and get the home they always wanted. That happens a lot. The key with all of this is that being a homeowner helps you build equity, which can either be used to get you to the next step, or it can be used when you retire to go to a less expensive place and have money in the bank, or And here's something that I've been thinking about a lot recently. So I moved from California to Florida, and Florida is known to be where everybody retires, right? Everyone comes to Florida. And the taxes and insurance have gone up quite a bit. We've seen rents go up quite a bit as well. And homeowners, if you own a home, let's say you bought a house in Florida 30 years ago, some people are like, oh, I'm gonna have to sell because I can't afford the taxes and insurance. Well, there's also reverse mortgages. Reverse mortgages, once you hit a certain age, all that equity you paid off, you can use that equity to stay in the house until you pass or until you end up in an assisted care facility, right? Everyone would rather just die in their sleep, I'm assuming. So, that's an option as well. That's not an option if you're renting, okay? And look, that may not be the right option for you, but the key is there's options. which is one of the biggest benefits I think of home ownership. Is I think about myself 30, 40 years from now and how making those payments every single month, because that's what it is to a large extent. It's a forced savings account, right? You're paying down the principal, you're paying down the interest, you're also living in the house at the same time. And when all is said and done, you own an asset, right? Whereas with renting, you're paying for where you live every month, but there's no savings to it. You don't own anything at the end of it. Your money's just gone. So that's what I personally think the biggest benefit of home ownership is. You know, a lot of people will talk about, well, there's tax deductions with owning a house. It depends on your personal tax situation. It depends on what state you're in. You know, some of the more recent tax laws did strip a lot of those benefits, but in certain parts of the country and depending on your income, there are still a lot of tax benefits to owning a house as well. The other thing to keep in mind is stability. So when you're renting, you don't really have stability. You know, the landlord can evict you. They can decide not to renew your lease. They can increase your rent to where you can't afford it. They could stop maintaining the property and you could be in an unsafe situation and you could have to move. When you own a house, you control all of that. You control the maintenance. You control if you're going to stay there or if you're going to sell. You are the master of your destiny. And that is something that people often underestimate. But there's been multiple studies that show that homeowners are happier. And my guess is that is because of the stability and also the control. So when we talk about control, think about it this way. If you're renting and you decide like, oh my gosh, this kitchen would be so much better if we knocked down a wall and we painted it XYZ, there's no way a landlord's gonna let you do that. And if you do that, it's gonna cost you a bunch of money and all you're doing is improving their property because once again, you're a renter and they could totally not renew your lease or evict you, okay? As a homeowner, you can do what you want. If you improve the property, you benefit from it. Now, of course, if you screw up the property and you do a terrible, terrible design, you'll get hurt by it a little bit, but you have control. You have the ability to go to Lowe's or Home Depot and go, I'm gonna paint the walls black. I'm down with that, right? You have that. And I think that in society, we're constantly being fed, you know, oh, you should just rent, you should just rent. Ironically, by corporations that benefit from that when you start going up the ladder as to who owns what. And I don't think people are really taking into consideration that we're all built to want to be the masters of our destiny, the controllers of our fate. And home ownership gives you that. It gives you that. It's that simple. You know, in the stability and control, you know how long your commute to work is going to be. You know what schools your kids are going to go to. You can make plans for the future, for a long future. And that is worth its weight in gold. Okay, so beyond the fact that you're saving money by paying down a mortgage, you're creating equity, the house is appreciating, you know, your payment staying here with the main bulk, the principal and interest, while the rent's going like that, it's also being the master of your destiny. That's what I think is one of the really important things that often we overlook. So, look, I could go on and on about the benefits of homeownership. Do I think that it's always the best time to buy a house? No, I talk about that in the renting video. Do I think that ultimately every American should own a home? I do. And do I think that it's possible? I do. And that's the thing. I get comments on YouTube quite a bit where someone will say, people like me with XYZ, we don't get homes. And a lot of times, I'm not sure how to respond to it because I actually get kind of pissed. And the reason I get mad is because I know that anything's possible. And I know that sounds corny, but I feel like the reason that less people own homes in America is because they're not given the tools, and it's almost like insider information to learn how to buy a house. And I think that's wrong. And I do think that social media, YouTube, Instagram, all that stuff, I think there's a lot of people working to get you guys as much information as possible so that you know that home ownership is a possibility, okay? And there's so many loan programs that we don't even talk about that help people get into houses. So right now, if you're sitting there thinking, people like me don't get houses, I want to challenge you and say, okay, you know what? Get on my calendar. It's free. It's always free, guys. I want to be really clear about that. Chat with Alyssa and Sandy about where you are and chat with them about what you need to do to get into a house. Do it. Look, you may have some hard work ahead of you. You may have to repair your credit. I've done that. I have clients who've had horrible scores, like 400, 300, terrible credit, but they've worked on it and they've gotten to their goal. And I feel like a lot of the reason that people end up thinking that they'll never own a house and not trying is because if I think about the way mortgages and real estate is set up, there's not a lot of education. And in fairness, there's not a lot of people offering to say, hey, let's spend 20 minutes on the phone. I'm not going to charge you for this, but I'm going to tell you what you need to do. And then if you do it, come back to me. There's not a lot of people in our industry that do that because they don't make money off of it. I do it because I was never told that, right? And I think that there's a gap in financial education, and I think it's one of the big reasons that we see, you know, certain demographics having less home ownership is because no one is giving them the information they need to be successful. So that is a big reason this channel exists, and it's why we have the calendar. It's so that you guys can say, this is what I'm thinking, and we can say, okay, this is what you need to do. And there is work involved on your part sometimes. But what I can tell you from watching hundreds of people over the years, guys, look, I've had thousands and thousands and thousands of clients, right? I've been doing this a long time. But I always have those people that stick out in my mind where I remember being on the phone with them and being like, okay, you need to do this, you need to do this, you need to do this. It might take you 2 to 3 years, 2 to 3 years, because there's a lot of work they got to do. But they do it. They do it, and they end up owning a house. And then they end up building wealth by owning that house. And that's the thing, is that you need to understand it is possible. If you need a direction, if you need a compass, if you need a roadmap, reach out. We don't charge for that. I'm going to say that 50 times because I know it's so unusual. Everyone's trying to sell you something. You know, all these financial gurus, oh, buy my this, buy my that, pay for this course, pay for that. No, let's get you on the path, okay? Because ultimately, owning a home is important to building wealth. There was a study done by NAR recently where they found, and it was over a 10-year period of time, that homeowners had 40 times the net worth of renters. 40 times. There is no reason that you need to be disadvantaged when we can get the education and help put together a game plan for you. There's no reason. There's a lot of programs designed to help, guys. So please reach out. Questions, comments, as always, I'm here for you. But I did want to definitely say, yes, home buying can be great and it can make sense. And there's a lot of benefits to being a homeowner. And it is traditionally how Americans have been able to retire and how they have built wealth. But more importantly, there's no such thing as people like me don't get houses. Unless you just want to say no to yourself. If you just want to say no to yourself, then you're right. People who say no to themselves don't get houses. That's true. People who say no to themselves don't find love. People who say no to themselves don't get in shape. But I feel like if you actually made it this far in this video, you're not going to say no to yourself. You might just need a nudge. So I hope this was the nudge you needed. Hop on the calendar. Let's get a plan. Let's start building some wealth. Let's start changing some of these statistics. Thanks for watching, guys.